Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Ash. Today, we will venture to the island of Alameda. Alameda is not just a county, for those of you further in the East Bay in Solano and Brentwood. It is an island and a city to its own, and it even has its own public utility. That island is evolving rapidly in its transformation from a former military base. And so today I am joined by Mayor
All right.
Ezzie Ashcraft, and we're going to learn a little bit about what they're doing, how they're transforming. They have some really innovative businesses there. Thank you, Mayor, for joining me today.
I'd love to tell you a little about my background. I'm not a lifelong resident. I'm a native San Franciscan. My parents met in San Francisco. They were from other places and married, and then I was born in San Francisco. By the time I was 4, they had moved to Alameda. I did grow up in Alameda. I went all through the public school system here until I went away to college at UC Davis. I worked for a few years as a probation officer up in Plumas County in the beautiful Feather River Canyon in Northern California. Then I decided I wanted to go to law school. I worked as a paralegal in a San Francisco law firm for a couple of years and then went on to Santa Clara University School of Law, graduated, and I practiced law, employment law, civil litigation, and eventually I got married, buy a home. My parents were still living at the time and living in Alameda, and they lured us to come back and look at homes in Alameda. And we were fortunate enough to find a home we were able to buy. We had twins. And in 1991, they just turned 33 last year, which amazes me. But I took a little time off after the kids were born. They were even harder than practicing law and going to trial. They were a challenge. I loved being a mom raising kids, but it gave me a little time to get to know the community where I was living. And at the time, they were young, little toddlers. And a friend called me one day and said, "Hey, we're doing this campaign to build a new library and we need help phone banking. Can you help?" And I said, "Sure, I'll carve out a little time in the evenings." The year was 1996, which doesn't mean anything unless you're an Alamedan who lived here then. That was the year Alameda learned that we were on the base closure list, really before World War II, but it kicked into high gear during World War II and the years after that. 1996, we were one of the bases on the base closure list nationwide. Our economy took a serious hit. It was not an optimal time to be running a campaign for anything that asked voters to reach into their pockets because property values plummeted. Not all of our military lived on the base. Some lived on the economy, rented in Alameda. There were obviously civilian employees at the base. The vacancy rate shot up and rental rates shot down, and with them property values. It was a rough patch for Alameda. Needless to say, if we knew more about running a campaign, and I had nothing to do with running, I was just a volunteer, we wouldn't have done it then. And that campaign lost very badly. It didn't even get 50% of the vote. And I knew how badly Alameda needed a new library because I grew up and went to school here. The beautiful old Carnegie Library that's across the street from my office, I can see its roof now looking out my window, was too small when I was going to high school. We would be sitting on the floor, on the stairs, because there wasn't enough table space. A group of us gathered afterwards and said, "Something's wrong. We really need a library. We need to figure out how to do this again and do it right." Just happened that the state library was doing a class on how to run a successful library bond. And this was before the time of Zoom and all that. But another woman and I said, "Let's sign up." And we drove up to Sacramento, sat in the front row. I took copious notes. We learned that we'd pretty much done everything wrong and not done the thing. We've done all the things we shouldn't have done and not done the things we should have done. But it was encouraging also because we learned how to do it the right way. So fast forward to the year 2000, We put the measure on the ballot again. This time it passed with 78.8% of the vote. And we have a new main library that's probably not new anymore because it's 10 years old. And we refurbished our 2 branch libraries. Then I was asked to sit on the hospital board and chair the campaign to keep the hospital open, which I did, and it passed. And then the mayor at the time asked me to serve on the planning board, and one thing led to another. And here I am as mayor of Alameda.
I love that story because you were inspired not to be an elected official, but you were inspired at first for a specific issue in giving back to your community. And then one led to another, from libraries to hospitals, to planning, uh, give the busiest people, the most involved people the next project because they figure out how to do it. Right.
I know that is so true. I think there's a saying, if you need something done, ask a busy woman, because I was already a mother of twins. So I knew about multitasking and juggling. And it just, to this day, I keep saying, it'll all get done, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. But you don't do anything alone in this business. I was co-chair of the library campaign. I chaired the hospital campaign on my own, but I co-chaired the library campaign. I was the volunteer coordinator. I had 100 volunteers from around the city that just stepped up and said, we love libraries. I mean, who doesn't love libraries? We just had to learn how to run an effective campaign, and timing has a lot to do with it. It was so wonderful to work with these volunteers. And this is something that I've carried on every time I've run for a campaign or when I'm supporting an issue ballot measure, is go door to door, talk to the voters. People love that. So I was able to assign 2 volunteers to every precinct, almost every precinct on the island. And for those few that I didn't have coverage for, the late Wilma Chan was a supervisor at the time, but running for the state assembly. And I knew her, and she was certainly supporting the library. And she told me, Marilyn, don't have coverage in every precinct. Give your literature to me because I've got people in every precinct, and we'll drop your literature where you don't have volunteers. And that was huge. It meant that we got coverage, people going door to door. And that is the grassroots campaign, in my mind, the best way to reach people. It means a lot to people to open the door and have someone standing there saying, look, I really care about the library. We need a new library. And at the time, I took my twins with me. That was 2000. They were like 8 years old at the time, and they would listen to my spiel, and then they'd say, Mommy, let me do the next one. Often tell people, if you're going door to door, bring a child with you, because no one slams the door in your face when you've got a child. If you don't have a child, borrow a child. What I will tell you about that is that it's never too early. It's never too early to teach your children about civic engagement. And I really think that's where you make them into lifelong voters. And so they went door to door with me. Sometimes they said the message. And then to see the measure pass so successfully was a wonderful lesson.
We had a measure in Walnut Creek where I live, a sales tax measure, go towards a new park. And I was dropping flyers in my neighborhood the same way. And they're the 2 older ones, 8 and 5 at the time. They took one side of the street and were dropping the literature. And I took the other side and was knocking, but they liked it as a race because they were dropping and I was knocking, taking longer. But they had fun. We were racing to do it and hit it until it got too hot for them. But
we have less of that problem here. It's more the
so
fog.
let's talk about, in Alameda, you referenced the base closure back in 96. It finding out had a big impact on the economy. 28, there's still a lot of vacant land related to the base, but there's a lot of housing coming. There's fun things like the vodka tasting and tours that are there. How has Alameda evolved its economy? And this is important for folks in Mare Island and the Concord Naval Weapons Station as they develop. What has really been successful there? And I know it wasn't overnight.
It was not overnight. I often say that Rome wasn't built in a day, and Alameda Point, we now call it Alameda Point, is not going to be completed in a day. but it will be within 30 years of when we started. That's our projection. And there were some stops and starts. We didn't get it right the first time out of the gate. But what we did finally settle on, and this has been the winning formula, is we are now our own developer. It didn't work out so well. But what we learned, and this was back when I was on the planning board, is after a couple of not great experiences with developers, was wait a minute, we know what is best for our city. The land mass out there is almost a third of the land mass of the entire city. So it's a lot of space. Not all of it is buildable and developable, and that's a good thing because it's going to have a wildlife refuge. It's going to have some great natural parkland, and also the VA is going to build a veterans clinic and a columbarium, which is above ground burial site. We want housing. In fact, one of the conditions of the conveyance from the Navy to the city was that of the housing that you build out there, City of Alameda, at least 25% must be affordable. And that's affordable based on the legal definition of affordable and for the Bay Area. We've actually surpassed that in the housing that we were building. 40% of it is affordable. We've been able to do a couple of 100% affordable apartment complexes, one for veterans, including formerly unhoused, homeless veterans, and another for low-income families. What the planning board did is we did all the entitlements. We said, all right, this is the enterprise zone where you can have light manufacturing and industry, and this is going to be residential, and this is recreational, and this is more food and beverage with the Spirits Alley or restaurants. This is what it requires. If you have a project, these are the requirements you need to. Also importantly, this is the cost of land per acre because you, developer, are going to have to pay for the infrastructure because when the Naval Air Station was built preceding World War II, it was built fast. Buildings went up to not the California Building Code, but whatever they needed to do to get those operations in place for the war effort. Now we need to replace everything, water, sewer, electrical, and there wasn't such a thing as the internet back then. Once you do that, you have a brand new area. In 2018, the city, working with community input and our different boards and commissions, and finally the city council, settled on 6 primary sectors that we wanted at Alameda Point. And they are the life sciences, and also clean, green, and high tech, then blue tech and maritime businesses, retail and restaurants, another category, tourism and hospitality, and also artists and small manufacturers. So through a combination of adaptive reuse of the buildings that we have out there, including a number of former airplane hangars, but also new construction like the housing that's going in, we are filling those sectors. When we're marketing Alameda Point, we especially reach out to folks who are doing these kinds of work. And then word of mouth is really powerful. People who are already out here will know other folks doing similar work elsewhere and say, you really ought to come take a look at Alameda Point. We have 3 business parks in Alameda. We've got the Harbor Bay Business Park out very close to the Oakland Airport, which is really helpful if you've got a lot of product you need to get on a plane. And then we've got the Marina Village Business Park, and we've got Alameda Point. But with Alameda Point, this is what we did. We said, we're going to be the developer. This is what we want. Developers, come see us. And on top of that, we can offer you, I think you know, Jared, that we have our own electrical municipal utility, community owned. It's called Alameda Municipal Power, or AMP for short. We're able to offer very economical rates, much more so than that other utility with 3 letters to its name. And certainly a selling point for businesses because that goes into the bottom line, right?
Well,
Or
that's
utility costs.
in a number of other podcasts is the inability of PG&E to deliver power in places has cost a number of businesses, from Solano to Hayward couldn't get a Rivian manufacturing plant, one of the hottest cars out there, because they said 7 years to get power.
Know
Our
that.
life science companies are turning down places in Vacaville because there's just not power.
So come see Alameda.
You have access to more power, huh?
We do. All the power. I'm very proud to say that as of a few years ago, the portfolio is diversified. You never want to have all your eggs in one basket, but all of our sources of power for AMP are clean and green. When I'm recharging my EV in the driveway, I can feel good about the fact that that's coming from AMP and it's 100% clean, green sourced. We've also got a Tesla supercharger at the South Shore Shopping Center.
That's good, because that come up too, that, hey, if you're charging a Tesla, but you're using diesel fuel on I-5 going to LA, you defeated the purpose.
Precisely.
How many people will you be when all of this housing is complete?
Be bigger with our population, and we can handle that, as can other cities. And this is something I feel passionate about. We have a housing crisis in this state. One of the what are we now? The fourth largest economy in the world. And yet we have people who are unhoused because of our housing crisis. We have people who are housing insecure, who are using up almost all their income month to month on their rent. And it is in large part a factor of supply and demand, because elected officials like me in previous years have said no to new housing, and not in my backyard, or no, because you could fill in the blank. Alameda's an island, and we're doing our fair share. And now the state government says, and you have to, and we mandate it, and there's penalties if you don't. Our RENA numbers, in recent years, we have added 454 new housing units out at Alameda Point, with another 1,439 to come. I want to say our overall RENA number is 3,500 some units, but spread across the island and done in a lot of creative ways, including, you're probably aware of some recent legislation, I think from last year, that encourages and incentivizes repurposing shopping centers, doing infill housing in shopping centers, integrating housing into vacancies and in shopping centers, 3 shopping centers in Alameda that we are working with to eventually add housing, which will bring customers for the retail, and it just has lots of benefits. That kind of infill housing doesn't have such a strong impact on a city because there's already the infrastructure there. There's transportation lines that go past. There's just a lot of creative ways you can add housing, including ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which we've really streamlined the process for applying for a permit for an ADU. And we've seen their number increase over the years. One of the other things we require of our developers of new developments, whether it's a new business park or business or residential, is they need to provide transit passes. We love AC Transit, but now it's more akin to a Clipper card, or maybe it is actually a Clipper card, because you can use it not just for AC Transit, but for BART, for WITA, for the ferry. We want to get people out of their cars and onto public transit or bicycles, only one or the other. Many of us use any number of different modes of transportation, just depending on the time and the purpose.
Let's talk about transportation from an island. Even though you're in the metro area, right? To leave Alameda, people have to travel through parts of Oakland that are becoming particularly worse, right? There are nice areas of Oakland. I don't want to just bash Oakland, but some areas of Oakland have gotten
Oakland
really bad.
needs a little love right now, I think.
Have there been issues for people coming and going from the island? Is it safe? Or what could be done to improve that commute?
The best thing you can do to improve your commute, Alameda residents, if you're listening, is take public transportation. I serve on some boards and commissions that meet off island. Today, for different reasons, I'm actually going to join from Pleasanton, from the fairgrounds, because I have to be in Danville later today for bocce. But usually my meeting is on Broadway in Oakland. So I can take the 51 bus. I either walk, if it's an early meeting in the morning, I walk 6 blocks from my house to the bus stop of the 51A, hop on it. In 20 minutes, I am at my destination. And I've gotten a little bit of email done on the way. As sometimes happens, someone looks over and says, "Aren't you our mayor?" And then we have a conversation, and that's perfectly lovely too. And people love seeing that the mayor doesn't just talk the talk, but walks the walk or rides the bus. If I'm going to San Francisco, I'll hop on BART. I'll hop on AC Transit to the BART station, usually for go to the city. I love, though, if the schedule works out for me, my favorite way to get to the city is the ferry. And I got to say that ferry commuters are the happiest campers out there. You never see a frown on the ferry, I'm pretty sure. There's no road rage, there's no traffic. And the only, I don't even call it a complaint, in air quotes, complaint I've ever had is someone, actually one of my children's friends, told me, "Ms. Ashcraft, now with the new fast service from to and from Seaplane Lagoon is at Alameda Point to the ferry building in San Francisco. On the way back, if I want to have a glass of wine, by the time I get in line for my glass of wine and get it, I don't even have time to drink it. We're already back in Alameda." Okay, first world problems. First of all, go take public transit whenever you can for so many reasons. Be aware of your surroundings wherever you are. You have to do that these days. The complaints I hear more from my residents about, say, coming through the tube, because again, as an island, you're going to either go over one of 4 bridges or under the water in a tunnel that we call the tube, or over the water in a ferry or parachute in. But I'll get complaints about, "Mayor, the entrance to the tube, but from Oakland, it's just awful. Can you do something about it?" And what I can do about it is ask staff to email or contact Caltrans, because that stretch from when you're heading into the tube, and in fact, the tube itself is Caltrans. It's not the city of Oakland or the city of Alameda. And I know what they mean. For the most part, residents are safe. And we also have a really impressive police department that does such a good job and works collaboratively with our neighboring police departments. Our police chief, Nishant Joshi, happened to come. He's an Alameda resident, but spent 23 years of his career with Oakland PD before he became our chief. Our fire chief also spent a couple of decades at Oakland Fire before he became Alameda's fire chief. They came willingly. We didn't steal them, regardless of what some mayors may have said.
Two interesting things I heard in that is the ferry service and the drink. And I have just recorded Seamus Murphy from the SF ferry service, and his biggest promotion was coffee in the morning, glass of wine or beer in the evening, come on to the boat, take a ride, it's easy. And the other thing is, for the mayor's birthday party, we are all going to be doing parachuting into the island.
Are we
All
now?
building in Oakland. We're going to try something new, as innovative in transportation as we are in the Bay Area.
Well, I'll give our folks out here fair warning of that. Probably like public safety. That sounds a little risky. I'm just going to say, Seamus Murphy, I'm a huge fan. I cannot say enough about WIDA and the ferries, and now they're moving to eventually becoming an all-electric fleet. And it's happening gradually and on the shorter runs. And I'm in full support of expanding the ferry network. Berkeley's hoping to have a ferry terminal. Redwood City just makes so much sense. The boats are pretty energy efficient and environmentally friendly, and they're so comfortable. If you're going to a Warriors game in San Francisco or a Giants game, you can take the ferry. They run special service to the games. Best way to get there. And so much fun to be on the boat going to a game. Even more fun if the team won on the way back. Everyone's in a good mood. But we can't expand our freeways anymore. We just can't, nor do we want to. And so we've got to get people to do that mode shift. But we, the elected officials, have to give them incentive to make it comfortable, to make it reliable, to make it safe. The ferry is all of those things. BART and AC Transit, they're stepping up their game too. I want to model that sort of activity. I'm easily once a week, I'm on some form of public transportation, and sometimes I'm on my bike and sometimes I'm on foot. But I just want people to know it's doable. I love seeing who's riding the bus and people talk to each other. They thank the driver when they get off, and it's like its own little community.
I'm going to circle back to the transformation that's taking place in Alameda. The the city's attracted and partly unique because of the waterfront and, like you said, the power need, has attracted some really innovative businesses to the island. Talk about that from an economic development standpoint and maybe some of the companies that you're familiar with them that you want to give a shout out to.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you. I'm impressed by and inspired by the companies we have in Alameda. Let me just give you some examples. So out at Alameda Point, and they've been there for a while, we've got a company called Sail Drone. And Sail Drone and they're located in one of our former airplane hangars because they need the height and the space. It's a drone, but on the water, and they're able to map the floor of the ocean. They tell me when I'm out there visiting, and I've read this too, that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the surface of our oceans. They can be dropped off from a cargo container anywhere, the North Seas or wherever, and they are controlled. It's incredible. It's almost like you had an iPhone in your hand when you're back at the Sail Drone headquarters in Alameda, and they're controlling this drone. It's fascinating to watch the footage. But with our government, with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, among others, because they are testing the temperatures of the water. How high are our oceans, the temperatures getting, and how fast? But also monitoring fish, different schools of fish. We have treaties, international treaties, to make sure that overfishing isn't happening because we rely on biodiversity of so many species. And yet, if some nations are violating those treaties, taking more fish than they're supposed to at a given time, that is harmful. But if that little sail drone is out there, it's capturing this information that is coming back to the source in real time. And then another DOER, which is DOER, is Deep Ocean Exploration and Research. The sail drones stay on the surface of the water, but their cameras certainly look down. DOER manufactures submersibles, and this manufacturing of both is going on out of Alameda Point. And another one of our airplane hangars from World War II vintage, but they're mapping the sea floor and they're taking scientists down in these submersibles that are like big bubbles. It's fascinating to see. There's a whole other world down there. And then we also have folks that are in the air because there's a very exciting company called Rain. And what they manufacture are aviation drones. They have a series of cameras that are spread out through different areas, our state forests, and I think some national forests in California, different areas that are at risk of wildfire. And those cameras, heat detection sensors in them that are connected back to Rain, if they sense that a fire is starting, a Rain drone is deployed. It carries with it a mix of fire retardant and water that then is mixed together until they get over the spot and can drop it down to extinguish the fire before it grows to a huge magnitude. We used to speak of fire season. There's no longer a fire season. It's year round. And there are so many harmful impacts to that besides losing property and human life and homes and that sort of thing. We don't have enough firefighters, and our firefighters get burned out. Something so tragic that I learned last year was there's a high suicide rate among firefighters who have been on these fire lines and without getting a lot of rest and just feeling so defeated that not being able to contain the fires, not to mention all the health risks of doing that kind of work. But these drones, when they can get in there and extinguish the fire before it grows, it has huge rewards for us. I was just listening to a story this morning on NPR about how the state insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, is working with insurance companies to incentivize them to come back and write coverage, like fire coverage for homeowners in places like Grass Valley and other areas that are susceptible to fire risk. There's another one I just love. They manufacture hydro turbines. These turbines are creating hydroelectricity, and part of our portfolio at AMP is hydroelectricity. But traditionally, the old generation of hydro turbines was very hard on the fish population. 1 out of 5 fish was going to die from going through a turbine, whether it's in a river or some body of water, and that harms biodiversity. So the smart folks over at Natal have devised this hydroelectric turbine that is fish safe. 98% of the fish that go through it come out alive, and it's generating hydroelectricity and helping to power our grid, which is always very susceptible to fluctuations and that sort of thing. And so as these old generation turbines are wearing out and needing to be replaced, because they have contracts with different governments of different states, and I think federal too, and even overseas, they're replacing these old fish dangerous turbines with the new ones. Again, being designed right here in Alameda.
From an economic development standpoint, those are really cool companies. What is Alameda specifically doing to help recruit those businesses other than its location on the water, which is a little bit unique, right? What
Yeah.
city putting in place? What are the tools in its belt?
I also want to mention we're in the life sciences too. And for instance, Penumbra and Exelixis are two of our largest life science employers. They both came to us from other cities. Penumbra had been down the road in San Leandro, and Exelixis, I think, had been in South San Francisco. They needed to grow. They wanted a place where their employees felt safe coming and going, didn't have to worry about their cars getting broken into in the parking lot and whatnot. And they chose Alameda. I know Penumbra was here first. I think their CEOs knew each other. So it's that word of mouth. And so what Penumbra does is it has this great life-saving, life-changing technology, a stroke. That's a blood clot in your brain, and that blood clot needs to be busted up and just broken apart so the blood can flow to your brain and quickly. They go in, they insert it, and it's able to do that. It's, guided, micro guided by a camera. That's in our Harbor Bay Business Park. And Exelixis it's oncology focused biotech company that is creating these innovative cancer treatments specifically designed for your specific type of cancer. Our team goes out and they talk to others. They look and see who they'd like to recruit. I know the San Francisco Business Times does an issue that we always make sure we're a part of about this is what's happening in Alameda. And so we do have that ability to say, here's what we can offer. We can offer the safety, the room for growth, the low cost, clean, green electricity, amenities, restaurants, places to go after work, and also the clean transportation to get there. The Harbor Bay Business Park is adjacent to the Harbor Bay Ferry, and the business park pays for a shuttle from the ferry that meets every ferry coming and going, makes a loop to the business park, dropping people off. And there's also a shuttle that goes to and from the Fruitvale. If you want to come to work at the Harbor Bay Business Park, you never have to get in your car. People coming and going, they've got their bikes with them and they're going to just bike to where they are. We can offer all of those things, and good marketing and outreach helps tell the story. And then that ever important word of mouth from people who are having a great experience here.
That's helpful to frame it up for other cities. But you guys just turned down a company that was innovative. Tell us a little bit about that and your thought process behind that.
I'll tell you a little more than was captured in a couple of sound bites from a council meeting at 1 a.m. It wasn't a company. It was the University of Washington, and they have, I don't know, an institute. I think it's called Silver Lining. I guess every cloud has one. So I took a quick little segue. So my children live far and farther away. And the morning after that, council meetings don't have to be fun, just civil. But my kids the next morning messaged me, Mom, you were in the New York Times. I was in the New York Times. And my quote, just love it. I'm going to make a t-shirt. Alameda doesn't need to be on the cutting edge of everything. Okay, taken a little out of context, but what I was saying to the scientist who wasn't answering my question, but was trying to persuade me that we should say yes to their experiment that I only learned about when I read it in the New York Times after it had begun, but that we should accept them because Alameda could be on the cutting edge of science. What I told other reporters who bothered to interview me, which the New York Times reporter did not, what I told the other scientists was, I'm listening to everyone who's speaking, but when we get a call in from the executive director of the Association of International Environmental Scientists in Washington, D.C., telling us that please don't say yes to this experiment. It is highly controversial because of the unintended consequences of, so you are trying to lower the temperature of the water, basically, and reduce the temperatures in your part of the hemisphere. It can be having the opposite effect on the other side of the hemisphere. As a result, 146 nations have signed a letter saying, please don't do this until there are some standards. Currently, there's no treaty, there's no regulations, there's no standards. It is the Wild West. One of the things is trust your instincts, pay attention, listen to all sides, but also trust your instincts. Got an email from KPIX just last week, as a matter of fact. Here's an update on the University of Washington researchers, climate geoengineering, and the Environmental Defense Fund. Turns out that the Environmental Defense Fund is going to fund research looking into what the unintended consequences of geoengineering could be so that groups and governments everywhere can be better informed. The Environmental Defense Fund's official position is they're opposed to any deployment until there is more evidence as to the benefits and risks. For example, and she cites a California startup that wreaked havoc in Mexico. They're also funded, this startup, by selling carbon credits, which is interesting. That's why the EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, has decided to fund this research. They know the technology is not going away. If it's going to be done, they want it to be done responsibly. So when I read that, because as I told other reporters, I didn't make that decision lightly. And by the way, I didn't make alone. It was a unanimous decision of the council. And when I'm persuaded by something, I'm a pretty powerful advocate. And I have sometimes convinced my colleagues who were predisposed not to vote a certain way to vote with me. I wasn't having one of those moments. But when I asked the scientists to comment on what about this unintended consequence of these kinds of experiments, what is your position on that? And all I wanted to hear was something like, we're taking that into account. We're doing computer modeling to make sure that we're not doing anything harmful. There's benefits and risks to everything. Her only response was, that's not what we're doing. We're just testing particle size to see what size salt particle fits through this machine. I only learned about the cloud brightening as a term from the New York Times article. I read about it. So piecing everything together with 2020 hindsight, they knew that what they were doing was controversial. And so rather than come to the city and say, hey, we'd like to introduce ourselves, this is what we want to do, what kind of permits would we need? They hired a consulting firm in Sacramento to see if they needed any permits. Natel wanted to expand the area where they're testing these turbines, and so they needed their use permit to be expanded. Somebody challenged that planning board, so it had to come to the city council. But Natel reached out to me, and I think every city council member had said, and I'd met them before and I'd toured before, but they said, Mayor, we'd like to come over. We'd love to show you what we're doing. We'd love to tell you about, and I spent a great hour out there learning so much. They weren't playing hide the ball. I'm all for science coming to Alameda, but responsible science. Thank you for asking.
There's two takeaways. One of the reasons I started this podcast is I was talking to two city managers in the same day, about an hour apart from each other. I said, what is the biggest thing the city needs? And they said to tell a story. And they said that there's so little news that covers the East Bay unless it's bad. Uh, this podcast is a format for you to tell your story and tell your side. The other takeaways from that are, as an elected official, listen to multiple sides of a story. And for companies who want to do business, meet with elected officials, talk it through with them. There are people like me who can connect you, but it's not just a plug for business. Go out and reach out. Most of these people are willing, not all, willing to meet with companies. They want to learn about you. They want to work with you. Invite people out to encourage them to meet and learn and educate them, because you're going to find that people are more friendly to work with you.
Absolutely. Even going back to when I was on the planning board, I was always willing to go out and do a site visit. Some resident wanted to do something in their home and the neighbors were objecting, and I'd say, may I come out and visit and see? But I would always tell them, it's just a site visit. I don't make up my mind until I'm sitting up there at the dais and I'm hearing from all the public speakers and from my colleagues. But I want to see, and if there's anything you want to tell me, I will listen, but it's not going to be a dialogue. And I tell that to the folks that I go visit now. This is just me out here to learn. I'm not telling you I'm going to vote one way or the other, but tell me what I need to know. And it's so helpful, and it just makes such a difference. And to this day, and this is nothing personal. Dr. Sarah Doherty is the scientist from University of Washington. She never asked to meet with me, even when the Silver Lining Institute reached out on the Wednesday before the Tuesday council meeting and said, Mayor, do you have any time to meet before the Tuesday council meeting? And you should see my calendar, Jared, but I threw it to my poor assistant who does. I said, Jody, please find time to meet. And then I reached out to our city manager, Jen Ott, and I said, hey, they want to meet. We want to join me. And she said, sure. And that Friday, even though I'd been down on the peninsula doing some site visits about a new aquatic center we're building Alameda, but I got back from the peninsula, and like at 3 in the afternoon, we met. The woman didn't even bring the scientist with her. It was just the woman from the Institute. Okay. And she wanted to tell us about the experiment. And so I said, I haven't decided how I will vote for all the reasons I just said to you, but just tell me this. I've learned from reading in the New York Times that this is a 20-week experiment you're proposing. We had told them, staff told them, you must pause this, because first of all, the lease we have with the USS Hornet didn't allow for this sort of activity. The Hornet was also less than forthcoming, but that's another issue. If you were to get a majority of the council to say, sure, go ahead, does the clock start ticking over? Do you reset the clock, or so many days already? When does that 20-week span run? And she says, we'd actually like to go to the end of 2024. And if possible, we'd like to go to the end of 2025. We asked the scientists who did the biological opinion for the wildlife and all this. We have a lot of wildlife we have to be mindful of. Before any development started, we went to them and said, so tell us, would this be safe for the wildlife? Would this be safe for humans, what they're doing? And for the wildlife, they said, yeah, for the 20-week time frame, that should be not a problem. They did the biological opinion. I'm not faulting them. They didn't have a lot of time to do this, but what they did, they reached out to a toxicologist with the list of chemicals that scientists said were going into the water to create salt water. Would this be safe for humans? So she ran it or compared it to a list of substances that OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, rates. And she said, yeah, that should be fine for the 20-week time period. Now, the thing about OSHA is you don't find children in the workplace, or you shouldn't. Sometimes they're there and they shouldn't be, but that's what OSHA standards are for. The USS Hornet is in close proximity to some soccer field, and soccer is big in Alameda, as I know it is in Walnut Creek and all over the place. It's also in close proximity to one of our high schools, Encinal High School, and their sports field, their track and their sports field. But what's the impact on children? I would have wanted to hear from a pediatrician, say someone from UCSF or some scientist who studies that sort of thing. But 20 weeks is 20 weeks. If we're talking to the end of 2025, that's a whole different ballgame. And again, you're just telling us this now, and this is supposed to be a scientific experiment, and don't experiments usually have a start date and an end date? They were just creating more questions in my mind than they were answering. And the only reason I was ever able to meet Dr. Doherty before the meeting that following Tuesday, we're meeting with this other woman on a Friday. The Saturday, the very next day, our economic development department, based for use in economic development department, did this open house at Alameda Point, which was amazing. And on like maybe 6 different stations, and on your phone, there was a QR code, you had the map on your phone, and you could go around at every station. You could learn from staff and from seeing and doing and touching what we're doing in all these different sectors that I was telling you about earlier. And so over by the Hornet, which was one of the sectors, the Hornet had set up a table, and I'm standing there and I've got my bike helmet on, and lo and behold, it's Dr. Doherty talking about all the benefits of doing this and how it'll be a great educational experience for school children. So I waited till she finished talking and the crowd had flipped away. And I said, "Hi, I'll see you Tuesday. I'm Mayor Marilyn Ezzie Ashcraft." And he was a little surprised, but she made an attempt to reach out to me for I don't know what reason. But anyway, that happened.
It goes for whatever your business, especially if you're going to have that much impact on wildlife. Meet with people, meet with community members, go meet with community leaders, neighborhood people beforehand, because it will reduce your complaints. It will educate them about what you're trying to do. And it's just good overall for our town. And I think there's some good lessons in there.
Oh, all of the above.
I appreciate your time today. Is there anything else you want to tell us about Alameda before you leave?
Alameda is proud to have, I'm told this year, the longest parade route in the nation. By the time this airs, our parade will have happened. It is so much fun. It's a huge block party, many blocks, 3 miles of block party. We had to pause the parade for 2 years during the pandemic. And that was hard. We encourage people to decorate their porch and stuff, but it's just, we look forward to this all year long. And so I will have so much fun. I will be riding an electric bike, which I've done now. This will be my 3rd year. It's a great way. I mean, I've done the thing where you sit on the back of the convertible and wave. Your arm gets a little tired, but it's fun. Then I conceived of the notion of an electric bike because, man, you get around quickly. A local bike store loans me one every year. But it's so great. I can zip over to one side of the street and say hi and have little chats, and over to the other side. It is just more fun. And what mayor doesn't love? It takes an hour or so to get through the parade route. An hour of happy, smiling, cheering people. We could bottle that and sell it.
We will have to check it out one year, and that sounds like a lot of fun.
You got to bring your girls some year. They would enjoy it. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me rave about lovely city. And it really is such an honor and a pleasure to be the mayor.
Thank you for being here.
The pleasure was mine. Good talking to you, Jared.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Ash, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.